Tremendous. Just while everyone's jumping on, thanks for joining us at this point. We're got a good number of people today on for our probably very timely topic of task and time management and how we can be more effective at it. I'm aiming to start on time today just to get the ball rolling. While we're waiting for everyone to join, if you mind using the chat and letting us know what city you're coming in from today. So appreciate you joining us today. If you could let us know what city you're coming in from, just in the chat, that'd be fantastic. Novelle, Perth, sensational. What have we got here? Newcastle, Kirsty, Sarah's in Melbourne, Neveline, I hope I've got that correct. From Perth, Zander in Melbourne. Yeah, it's fresh as we come into this time of year, isn't it, Zander? Gold Coast, Kate, so you're on the flip side of us down here south. Zach, Torquay, Surf Coast. Charmaine, another Surf Coast, but the other side. Byron, awesome. So thanks very much for joining us from all these regions that you come from today. I'm just making sure everyone can come into the meeting today. My name's Greg Gordon. I'll be coordinating the session today. It's one of our monthly meetings we have, and doing them via Zoom in a webinar. And today's topic, we're going to be looking largely or purely focusing on task and time management. So how can we be more effective in what we do? So it is probably an art we want to master in many ways, and it's something that if we don't master it, it comes to bite us. So we'll see in a moment that if we don't learn to manage time ourselves, it will end up managing us, and we'll be sort of have a bit more of a victim mentality than a victor mentality. I'm the Learning and Development Manager for the Marketing Sales Group and have been for some time now. And the webinars are just one of our areas of where we run training programs. These are complementary, of course. We have structured programs, which you'll receive information following the webinar and just some of the other things we do. So it makes it easier for you to see what we do in an extensive period as well. The effective time management and task management we'll look at today is part of our leadership program. It's also part of our developing manager program, and largely because it makes up a key part of most people's roles at some stage. It's going to be necessary no matter what your role, whether you're in developing, evolving as a leader, managing. So let's dive into it today, because I want to try and keep within the time to try and keep with the theme there. So thanks for joining us. I want you to think here, I'm going to get you to use the chat again for those who are quick and nimble on the fingers. If you had an extra hour in your day, so what we call this a Kickstarter question. If you were given an extra hour to do anything you want with the day, what would you do with it? All right, so if you had an extra hour in your day, what would you do with it? Because so it's a, let's see what we come up with here. All right, Zach's gone the exercise thing. Self-development, Xander. Well, great, you're already using that today, sensational. Neveline reads, spend time in nature. Jessie would exercise, Kirsty would bake. As we get into winter, that's awesome, Kirsty. Exercise, again, Sarah. Gia, is it? Sleep. We'll try and dispel that one. More exercise for Kate, and exercise outside, Bridge. All right, so exercise gets a good vote there. It's a key thing to understand with, there's a book we'll be, with each of our courses, each of our programs and each of our webinars, we're always calling upon evidence as well as case studies. Cal Newport's just written an awesome new book that I'll share with you at the end, but this was a quote from him where he says, where we'd like to spend more time often highlights what we'd like to prioritize, but we often sacrifice at the expense of something else. So if we just look at your responses then without judging it, but just because they were very quick responses, but for those of us who said exercise or time outside, we need to be wary of, according to Cal Newport, are we sacrificing that at the expense of something else? And if we are, what is that something else? You know, that somehow is getting the priority over what it is we'd rather be doing with our time. So today we're going to look at, first we have to understand what time management is, and there is some skill component to it, and there is some knowledge component to it, but more than anything, it's a discipline. And because it's a discipline, that suggests it's a behavior for us. And we need a reason why, and as well as the reason why, we need a how-to. So today we'll look at combination of those. Oh, thanks, Neveline. Yeah, free to focus. And we'll look at another one too, stolen focus too, Neveline, as well. Thank you. So if we look at it as a discipline, so we think of it as a discipline rather than just skills, even though we'll be looking at some skills and definitely some hacks today to try and reclaim some of this time, that we were also going to look at how we can adjust our behaviors. So why is it important? We often look at, with all our programs, we say, why is, what is it? Why is it important? Where do we get it wrong? How can we get it right? So today, if we look at why it's important, and some of these hopefully will be pretty obvious to us, but we might forget them sometimes. Those of us who are better with time management and more in control of our day will definitely accomplish more. There's no denying you will accomplish more. The other thing is, when we have greater time and task management, we will be more intentional. That is, because we'll have a focus, we'll act with intent. And a lot of us know that some people set intentions more than they set goals now. We can also maintain a healthier balance. And some of us talk about work-life balance. I tend to refer often as work-life integration, because I think you bring your real you to work. Hopefully it's not an artificial you. A greater sense of control and autonomy. So if and when we are better at task and time management, we feel more in control and more in control of our day. And in this sort of diversified workforce that we have today, where some people are working remotely, some people work from in-office, some people work independently, some people travel, that autonomy is extremely important so that we can still get things done, what's important to us. We'll decrease stress. And probably for those of you in management positions and where people report to you, the last one's extremely important. If we do things on the fly or under rushed or under the pump, as we tend to say here in Australia, we increase our error rate. If and when we're organised and structured, we decrease the chance of making errors. We know research tells us that more errors are made when we are time poor. So that's a classic one for us when we think of it in a business sense. So I'd like you to consider these questions as I've posed them here. And these are questions we put in one of our programs on task and time management. So I want to share them with you today. And just while they're rhetoric, I'd like you to think of how you would answer them. And we scale them from 1 to 5, absolutely through to definitely not. But do you prioritize your tasks? Do you work on your highest priority tasks first? And unless you prioritize tasks, your answer will be no to that. So if you don't prioritize tasks, your answer would have to be no, because you don't know what your priorities are yet. Secondly, do you set aside time each week for planning and scheduling? All right, so I know some of the people on the call today have been on some of our programs before, so thanks for rejoining us. And I know quite a few of you do dedicate at least some of your week. And I know many of you on Sunday afternoons, will set aside half hour or an hour to plan your week ahead. Do you have strategies for minimizing interruptions and distractions? As we'll see, they are a part of our life, whether we like it or not. But do we have strategies for them? Do you use goals or KPIs or intentions to provide a focus for your work time? So it gives you some sort of laser-like focus. And the last two there, can you distinguish between urgency and importance? They are quite different, and we'll see that in a moment when we look at what's called the Eisenhower matrix. Can you do that effectively? And the last one, I suppose, for those of us who do report to a manager, if you're ever uncertain about the priority of something, rather than guess, do you consult with your manager? Before I progress with this, can I just check on the priority it has? So that'll affect the priority I place upon it. So these are some questions I'd like, we talk about in task and time management. All right, and here's a quick one for you, a quick exercise. I'd like you to think, if you had this $86,400 to spend and you had 24 hours, how would you spend it? All right, remember, whatever you don't spend, you only get 24 hours to spend it. All right, so think about how you would spend it. And I'm guaranteeing for most of us, you would probably find a way to spend it. All right, so you would find the way, because we just don't get given that sort of stuff all the time. So you'd maximize it and you'd squeeze the most out of it. The key thing we have to realize is, how do we prioritize the time we have each day? Because each day we get the same thing in seconds. Rather than $86,400, which I'm guessing most of us would try and spend. If we only had 24 hours to spend it, we'd find a way. But when we're given 86,400 seconds at the midnight tonight for tomorrow, are we using that productively, or are we wasting some of it? And to use it for excess, as we'll see in a moment, if we're excessively involved in anything, it can be considered waste, right? And that's a model we'll look at in a moment from Covey. So it's just an analogy or a metaphor I'd like you to think of to kick us off. All right, so some research that comes in, and many of you, I'm sure there's some of you that would consider yourself to be very good at multitasking. And it's not uncommon for people to say, I'm great at multitasking. And I often share, and I know this is recorded, but my wife doesn't watch any of my recordings, so it's good, that of an evening, my wife can drink wine, cook a meal, and talk on the phone to her mother quite easily, and do them all quite well. The thing is, none of them require 100% of her attention. If all of a sudden her mother told her about her uncle who's very, very ill at the moment, and it's sudden, I guarantee what would happen, the glass would go down and the stove would probably be turned off so she can focus on the call, because the call now requires 100% of her attention. Multitasking can only be done effectively if and when we do it with submaximal tasks, because we only have 100% attention to give. So we only have 100% attention to give. So this research has come through a great book, another one I want to share some content with today, Johann Hari. And it is looking at what we call the attention economy, which I think many of us are familiar with now. And that is why we can't pay attention and how to think deeply again. And a lot of the research now tells us that if and when we try and multitask, we cannot perform at our optimum unless the optimum performance for that task doesn't require 100% of your attention. So in other words, what we might call a menial task. And we'll see in a moment how we can reverse engineer this, and how we can give a task more attention is to give ourselves more challenging tasks. So for those of you who drive, you might have known when you drive through fair conditions and those conditions change and the weather starts getting severe, I would not be surprised if some of you turned off the radio. And in doing so, you might think that sounds kind of strange, but it's actually sensible, because what we're doing is giving ourselves full attention. Or we stop talking to the person next to us and saying, hang on, I've got to focus here. So Johann Hari's research even found here, so it can take as long as, right? It can take as long as 23 minutes. I'm just looking up his research, sorry, on the side here. As much as 23 minutes for us to regain our attention after receiving a text message, right? As long as. Right? Now, many of you say, no, I receive text messages all the time. That just shows what's happening is we're losing what you'll see in a moment is known as, we call the switch cost effect. The switch cost effect is the effect of switching tasks, switching from what you were doing, right, to what you should be doing. So in this instance, Hari's research found that depending upon the content of the text, of course, or the message, or the quick email that you just jumped over, or the notification, you might have been focused 100% on the task you were in. And once you read that message, you will not go immediately back to 100%, unless that message was easily to decipher and has no impact on you, in which case it probably shouldn't have been a message. So when we do this, we are often thinking about what it was. We're thinking about the subcontext, or what we call the paralanguage. What do they mean by that? Should I respond now? No, I'll think about it. Okay, I'll do it now. And we literally lose the focus on the task that we were doing. So we've got to be wary of this switch cost effect. So the switch cost effect, again, to reiterate, is the cost of switching from one task to another briefly before getting back to something, right? Is the exact opposite, is probably the arch enemy of what we'll look at in the moment, of time blocking. All right, so let's have a look at some of the tools and strategies and behaviors and disciplines that are out there for us. So the Eisenhower matrix. Eisenhower matrix is designed into 4 quadrants, as hopefully you can see well. we need to firstly decide, is it urgent or not urgent? And then we need to also determine, is it important or not important? Now, urgency and importance are very, very different. Urgency is time-driven, right? Something is urgent if it needs to be done in a certain time frame, right? So it's an immediacy effect. Importance is determined by the consequence of non-completion, right? So again, urgency is time-driven. Importance is consequence-driven. And now we have these 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1's top left, quadrant 2 top right, 3 bottom left, 4 bottom right. If something's urgent and important, we call it the quadrant of crises. And it's important, it needs to be done now. It's urgent, it's time-driven, it needs to be done now. For us, as you'll see in a moment, we don't want to spend a lot of time in there, but if we do, we want to be effective. On the top right, you'll see it's not urgent, but it's important. Now, this is a lot of our professional development, right? So for us in the world of coaching, professional development, exercise, a lot of us listed that, going out to the outdoors, that's that. And this is a classic. You can see here, this is where we're going to decide when we're going to do it. We need to schedule a time. So if we look back at all those things you said you don't have enough time for, if you had more time in your day, what would you do? An extra hour? Many of you said exercise. Someone said we had bake, we had rest, we had outside, wilderness or in nature. We can schedule that. It doesn't have to be done now. You don't have to exercise at 12:48 p.m. It's not a time-driven thing. It is if you're at a member of a gym that has certain classes that only occur at certain times. That can push it across, but you can still schedule it. Quadrant 3 is when it's not important, but it's urgent. And this is when it comes in, the consequence to you isn't great, but the consequence to others can be. And we often refer to this as OPP, other people's problems. That is, other people's problems, it's urgent, it's important for them. You may have a colleague or a friend or a family member who can't find their keys, their wallet, their phone. And we're going, oh, remember, it's not my circus, not my monkey. So it's not important to you, but it's urgent for them. And the bottom right, it's not urgent, it's not important. We call this the quadrant of excess. So here they are again, and how we can deal with them. So quadrant 1, try and reduce your time in there. No one desires to spend time in there, by the way, with the exception of the emergency services and military when they are in active duty. They are the ones that probably spend a lot of time in quadrant 1. The reason the emergency services and why we hold them all in awe usually, and why they're so good, I'm yet to see an ambulance officer panic on site. It's because they've spent so much time in quadrant 2. We are more effective in quadrant 1. We will all be thrown in quadrant 1, where it's urgent and important. You will all spend time in there. But you'll be more effective if you've spent time in quadrant 2. So the reason, if I use the ambulance officer as the example, the reason they're good when a crisis comes in, which is quadrant 1, is they've practiced it. They've role-played it. They've done scenario training, right? They've used the mannequins. Yeah, they've done all that training beforehand. So there's a very old saying, it's from the Stoics, so from 2,000 years ago, that is, we bleed less on the battlefield because we sweat more on the training track. And so what that suggests is if we spend more time in quadrant 2, doing the preparation, the planning, the prevention, right? We're more efficient when we're in quadrant 1, if we're ever put in there. For anyone that's ever about to or been through a pregnancy with you or your partner, I'm hoping at some stage you did the dry run to the hospital. Doing the dry run to the hospital before the baby's being born or about to be born is quadrant 2. The baby's nowhere near born yet. Do a dry run to the hospital, quadrant 2, so you know the way well in advance. Quadrant 3, you can see we delegate. Quadrant 4, this is where we get in the space. If you have people you manage, we want to minimize this for them. It's decluttering. It's getting rid of unnecessary tasks. It's actually called the quadrant of waste and excess. So flicking through things like social media can be quadrant 2 if it's relationship building. It's not urgent, but that's important. It's absolutely important to keep in touch with your family and friends and to celebrate people's birthdays with them. A great element of social media. Is it necessary to watch the 4th video of the cat playing the piano? And the answer is probably no. So it comes down to quadrant 4. That's when we determine excess. Sorry to the cat lovers. But too many episodes of Netflix in a row. Do we really need to watch the 3rd series tonight? So you might say, let's do 1 or 2 episodes. So you've got to realize, when is it true recreation or enjoyment or a hobby, which is quadrant 2, by the way. Relationship building, quadrant 2. Quadrant 4, excess. All right, so that comes from Stephen Covey, by the way. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The next tool I'd like to share with you is it is my favorite business equation because it's the simplest. So what I'd like you to think of firstly is the question at the bottom. And again, if you can indulge in the chat, what's your greatest interference? Like, what's the thing that interrupts you the most, whether it's invited or uninvited? All right. So it could be, I know some of you are in HR and administration, it could be knocks on the door, right? It could be being called into a meeting. It could be notifications on your phone or getting constant text messages. So if you just share there, what's your greatest interference? It can be self-interference, self-doubt is an interference, by the way. So things that get in your head that stop you thinking clearly. Let's see. Novelle, people coming to ask that 1-minute question. Thank you, Novelle. Phone messages, Xander. Yeah, Kirsty. Questions and problem solving. Yes, Kirsty, I've known you for a while, and I think you might be the chief answer officer, the CAO. My phone messages. Great, thanks, Kate. So these become for us our interruptions. Now, with interruptions, we have to say, were they welcome or unwelcome, invited or uninvited? Right, so if you got a phone notification, Jess, and it said happy birthday, that was uninvited but welcome. If you send out a message to everybody, Jess, and said it's my birthday, and then you started getting messages all day, well, it's invited, and while welcome, it starts becoming a bit detrimental. So we can see what starts happening here. So we get the pushback, but we created it. So the formula we look at here, and the simplicity of it, is your performance is equal to your potential at the moment. So we can only perform as well as our competencies allow us at this point. So large P equals small p, minus I, which is interference. Therefore, according to this simplistic formula, if we can make I 0, which I'm pretty hard to find it being. I'm in a Zoom room at the moment. I was a very small phone Zoom room in our shared workspace here in Melbourne. And so there's nothing going on around me. Very simple light, very simple walls, as you might be able to see in the background. So interference is minimal, which ideally gives me more chance to give focus on what I'm doing here. However, if you've worked in a building, I'm sure we've all worked in a building where there's construction next door and there's a crane lifting a bobcat. Now, some things just catch your eye, don't they? So this interference gets in our way. Sometimes this invited interference. Did we do it? Knocks on the door, phone. So when we had the phone messages, can we put the phone on silence notifications, disable the people being able to call us, to put our phone onto airplane mode? That would decrease the interference. However, some of it's necessary sometimes. That's where the interference comes in. So we've got to be wary of, can we minimize interference, right? How can we minimize it? As well as the other things you mentioned, social media is a huge one, as was partially identified. Self-doubt and uncertainty is interference, by the way. So they're not always physical things. They can be mental things as well. All right, some tips to regain control. Let me go through these for you. Each of us probably, the better you get to know yourself, and we discuss this in emotional intelligence, when we get to know ourselves, we call it self-awareness. You might know if you're an AM person or a PM person, or if you do your best work between 1 and 2 p.m. Or at night, you like to do a bit of work between after the, whatever it might be, after dinner, you might sit down for an hour, you get so much done. Identify the time frame. It's not always an hour, but when you do your best work. The second point, as we mentioned earlier, was setting intentions, not just goals, but intentions. An intention could be, today my goal is to be focused and uninterrupted. So that can be an intention, right? It's not your goal that you won't be interrupted, because you can't control that. You said there's an intention, you can start taking a bit more control, and it acts the way you behave. It's process-oriented, not goal-oriented or results-oriented. Thirdly, as I might have mentioned earlier, seek challenges. We focus greater when it's a more challenging task. Right? We focus greater when it's a more challenging task, which is why if we set ourselves challenges, we'll give it greater attention. If it's something you can do easily, you don't have to focus too hard. And you'll probably end up multitasking, which will invite interruptions and will drag the task out. Set time limits. Prioritize, learn to prioritize. Is it high, medium, low? Priority 1, 2, 3, or 4? Is it quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4? Time confetti, you can see there. Time confetti is sprinkling too much of your time around with everything, trying to be all things to all people and do all things at all times. It's ineffective, right? It's never been proven effective. It gives us this feeling of busyness, and busyness is not a good moniker, right? And the last one's marry complementary tasks. What that suggests as a hack or a practice is, let's say the home front. You may be like many of us that might use the weekend to spend a bit of time cleaning the house. Getting house cleaning mode, sorry to use as an example in a work-related thing, but once you're in it, walk around with a spray and wipe in your hand, the tea towel over your shoulder, or a rag, the broom. You'll be stunned how much you get done when you get in the one mode, right? So, and this is where we'll look in a moment with one of the other strategies where we call time blocking. A great screenshot, I've just added this into the slide deck. So we look here in many ways, what we have is, if we can look at the start, which is the decision that needs to be made, we've got decisions at the start, then our attention, then our energy, right? So decisions, attention, energy. What needs to be done? So if we act on the important rather than reacting to the urgent, right? So we're often reactive. It's better off if we can be proactive, which is the idea of setting intentions, setting a priority task for ourselves before other things jump in and people try and steal our time. The second one, go for the extraordinary rather than settling for ordinary. You know, there's so many flavors of ice cream, don't have vanilla. So going for extraordinary, suggesting go for challenging tasks. They will give you greater focus. Big rocks versus gravel. Big rocks are the key things that if you get done, the gravel is just the small little things we have to sort later on, right? Think of the big things that will actually impact the small things. Small things won't impact the big things. They'll get in the way and they'll prevent you doing them. And that helps us understanding scheduling. If and where you understand your technology, there's some great tools out there. You might be a person who uses Monday, Slack, Todoist. There's so many resources out there for you to use. Think about which ones can work for you, right? Not hinder you, but don't let it rule you. You try and take over the ones that, if they can work for you. And beware, the last thing is your energy. Be wary of not burning out, right? And that's if we can manage our area effectively. Other strategies you can use, just some quick ones here, coming into our time. The Kanban board is from Taichi Ono. What his model is, if you can think of, I have a visual, but I didn't bring it in, sorry, because it is a board with post-it notes, has 3 columns with post-it notes on it. And they're all the little tasks you have. So you might call them the gravel or the small tasks, because there's a tip using 5-minute tasks. Whatever it is, we have 3 columns to do. The middle column is doing. The third column is done. So it lets you see what you've got to do. It lets you know what's in progress. And the third one lets you this sense of achievement, you've done it. And you can shift a task across the board. So 3 columns. Time blocking is doing similar related tasks. Spend an hour to knock over all your emails, then get into the client proposal if that's what you have to do. Di Clegg's model is must do, should do, would be nice. So we call them, that's a common one for prioritizing, priorities A, B, and C. I must do this. I should do this. It'd be nice if I can squeeze that in, right? And many people use that as a prioritizing tool. For anyone with some Italian in them, the 4th model is the tomato technique or the tomato timer. A Pomodoro is a tomato technique from Awesome Nonnas is where it came from. It's a timer that times the cooking of tomatoes. But not that you need one of these, it's suggesting that we set a time to tasks. I'm going to work on this for the next 45 minutes. Set an alarm for 45 minutes. And the last one, who's from a client of ours and a good friend, Tony Van Eyck, he uses a great tool, which we use here on select times. It will be a good Tuesday when. right? And then we list the things. And they're the things you want to do that day to make it a good Tuesday. So now you're in a sense of control that if it's going to be a good Tuesday, I'll get these things done because I want to make it a good Tuesday. So you approach it with a totally different approach. Right? And that could be when you get your exercise in, when I've walked the dog, when I've rang my mum, when I've done this project, whatever it is. But you tick them off and you have a different approach to it. So there's some little tips there as well we put in. There's the reference to the book I was mentioning for you. It's Cal Newport. Really, really good one. Again, the lost art of accomplishment without burnout, the key thing. He's just recently done some really good interviews. So you've probably seen him being interviewed. I know he's interviewed by a guy called Ryan Hawke, who does the Learning Leader podcast. Anyone who's into leadership, I'd recommend it highly. The Learning Leader podcast was one of his most recent interviews, and it was so insightful as to how we get caught up in the hustle and bustle of things, but we identify ourselves with busyness. And it's not a moniker we want to, if someone says, how have you been? Busy. It's not something we really should always be proud of. So it's teaching us to slow down and still get things done. So there we have some tips for us today, squeezed in ideally. Thank you for joining us. Letting you know, our next webinar in a month's time will be utilising the power of story. And how do we use story in business? How do we use story to coach people? How do we use story to pass on messages? And how do we use metaphors and analogies to enhance learning and to make it meaningful for our audience there?